My name is Carrie Casey, and I'm a trustee at American Ballet Theater.
Hi, I'm Christine Shevchenko, and I'm a principal dancer with American Ballet Theater.
My name is Thomas Forster, and I'm a soloist with American Ballet Theatre.
Hi, I'm Alexei Ratmansky. I'm an artist in residence with American Ballet Theatre.
Hi, I'm Ormsby Wilkins. I am music director for American Ballet Theatre.
So today we're going to be discussing ABT's newest ballet of Love and Rage, which was going to have its New York premiere on Tuesday, June 2nd of this year. Of Love and Rage was choreographed by ABT's Artist in Residence, Alexei Ratmansky. It has music by Aram Khachaturian, arranged by Philip Feeney, and sets and costumes by Jean-Marc Puissant. The ballet had its world premiere at the Segerstrom Center for the Arts in Costa Mesa, California on March 5th, 2020. And I think for many of us, this was either the last live performance that we saw or danced in or participated in before the global pandemic hit. For me personally, I know that feels like a long time ago, but I'm grateful that we can all be together to talk about this beautiful ballet. So Of Love and Rage is set across the Mediterranean in the ancient world, and it's based on Kaleroy, one of the earliest historical novels ever written. It weaves the epic tale of the legendary beauty Kaleroy and her lover Kereas and the daunting obstacles that they navigate. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. Alexei, let's start with you. Could you tell us about what drew you to working with this ancient Greek novel?
Well, honestly, I didn't know about it. I've known Greek theater, Greek art, but not the literature. And the great friend of mine who I worked with before, Guillaume Gaillen, a French director and actor, I've dreamed to work with him again. So I asked him, find me a subject, preferably from Greece, for a new full length. So yeah, he said, well, there is this first novel ever written, check it. And I fell in love with it. And I thought it's suitable for the ballet. It's a great opportunity for me to use what I've been really passionate about for the last few years. You know, Greek sculpture is a late discovery, because when I started to travel around and, you know, visited museums, I would always skip the antiquities. I would always go to paintings. And then at some point, I think it was at Copenhagen, I was in this beautiful museum called Glyptotek, a fantastic collection. And it was an eye-opener. I thought, that I'm missing something very important. And since then, I've been chasing the Greek sculpture, you know, all over the world, and collected thousands of images that I was eager to use in my new ballet. That's the story.
Great. So the story covers a lot of ground, both geographically and also thematically. And Christine and Tom, I was hoping that you could do a tag team attempt at telling us the plot.
So pretty much, Of Love and Rage is an epic tale, and it's about the beautiful Kaleroy and her lover Kereas. And basically, at first glance, they instantly fall in love at first sight. And Kaleroy has suitors that grow very envious of her love for Kereas and plot to break them apart. And they succeed by tricking Kereas into thinking Kaleroy is unfaithful. And Kereas's jealousy and his rage, I believe, is sort of his downfall, because he gets so jealous that he strikes Kaleroy, and she falls lifeless on the ground, and everyone believes that she is dead. And sadly, they have a funeral for her and put her in a tomb. Later on, after everyone leaves the tomb, she happens to wake up, and as she wakes up, pirates come to steal the gold and treasure inside the tomb. And when they see her alive, they kidnap her as well and take her on a journey that's full of deception, war.
So as Christine was saying, Carisius had a moment of rage that he was tricked into, and he did an unspeakable act, which he is forever remorseful, and actually it brings him so much remorse that he wants to take his own life. But it's on visiting her grave that he realizes that not only have the pirates stolen the treasure, but they've also stolen the love of his life. So him and his friend, they go on an epic journey in search of his love, and unbeknownst to him, she is going through a crazy life journey, which is incredibly interpreted through Alexei's choreography and work. And then towards the end of the ballet, there's an epic battle that's super fun to dance. And then finally, when Carisius becomes the champion, he manages to find Carisius. Sorry, I'm messing up the names. He manages to find Calaroe, and basically, she forgives him for all he's done to her, and they are reminded of that love they had right at the beginning. And through their whole journey in the ballet, they both keep their wristbands, which represents their marriage and their love together. And then there's a beautiful scene at the end where Carisius and Calaroe manage to get their boy back, and they walk off back into the sunset or the field or whatever you wish to interpret the ending, but beautiful ending.
Alexei, you worked with a famous French director and actor as your dramaturg, Guillaume Gallienne. What was that process like?
Well, as I said, it was his idea, and the idea of mine was to use the score of Aram Khachaturian, because I believe that the successful ballet needs a great score. That's a very, very important part of the success. And I had a long list of great scores that I wanted to use that are not so well known, maybe. So that's where Khachaturian's Guyana came in. About Guillaume, he is a brilliant person, very good actor and director, and he can look at it from a different point of view, working with drama actors and directing movies. He has the utmost understanding of how the action should be presented and the motivation of the characters and what's important, what's not. Because if you read the story, it's so complex, so full of actions, that you get lost. You just fall. It's like it's not a great literature, but it's a wonderful action. It goes on quickly, and you don't have time to think about it. Everything happens without thinking. So he was instrumental in getting into the compressed form, and we decided that it's 2 acts ballet, because 2 acts and 3 acts is 2 very different beasts. Where to finish the first act, and which the length of each scene. Then we listen to the score and try to imagine what music goes where, because the original story is very, very different, and I was certain that I don't want to use it. So the music written for a different story, it needs some work to get it all together. Another great collaborator that we had, Philip Finney, a composer and a music arranger, that was his part was equally important, you see, and we had meetings, we discussed it online, and then we came about this compressed 2 acts of action and dancing. Mm-hmm. Guillaume was able to join us in the last, I believe it was the last rehearsal week before we went to California to premiere it. And I was so happy that he arrived because, you know, it was a deadline. I was very much into the steps, sometimes losing the whole picture. So his fresh eye and his understanding of what's important for the character and his suggestions were just brilliant, really brilliant. Yeah. And he's just a very fun guy, you know, always in a good mood, always jumping around and showing the steps, even though he's not a dancer. So I think I was very, very happy with the fact that he was able to collaborate.
Perhaps you could say a bit about Khachaturian's music. Who was Khachaturian? What characterizes his music? Where did this music come from, etc.?
Well, yes, maybe I can expand a little bit on what Alexei mentioned. Of course, Khachaturian was was an Armenian composer, and of course, Armenia is in that Caucasus, you know, eastern sort of area of the world. Sort of Middle Eastern influenced in some ways, and of course this story is in Greece and in the Middle East, and it seemed to me that not only is this music wonderful, but it also had this flavor and quality that perhaps helped to tell the story as well. But I think that I remember hearing Alexei at one point say there is so much loud music in the Gaena, the original Gaena. I think I would like to say more epic music, a huge amount of epic music. It's very cinematic, the music in many ways. Some beautiful restrained passages as well, but there is a lot of big music. And so I think it was important to have someone like Philip Finney, who was so experienced in full-length ballets and doing this sort of synthesis of both it's all basically Khachaturian's music, but with some other additions to the score other than Gaena, which I think was really fabulous because he was able to produce some more intimate pieces that I think helped to enrich the score, which was already a very rich score, but I think it allowed Alexei to also to add more character development to, I think, a lot of the characters. But Philip was wonderful, and he could turn on a dime. I think that was a wonderful thing about Philip. He could, if Alexei needed to make changes, and of course he did. This is the process of doing a full-length ballet in this way. There are always going to be changes, even through the choreographic process. I remember one particularly last-minute change was that when the scene moves to Kalaroe and Dionysius, I think Alexei felt that Dionysius needed some extra development of his character before he actually meets Dionysius. So he asked for a piece of music. I think it was only a week before we left for California, or even less. I remember it was very last minute. And we contacted Philip, and he just composed, you know, overnight. He composed what I thought was an extremely characterful and really a piece of music, only about, I guess, a minute and a half music was all that was needed. But it seemed so right. I was just amazed how he came up with this, and Alexei, I think, choreographed it really quickly after that. And I think this was Philip's talent all the way through, that he could change, he could work with Alexei. As I say, if he needed to change things, he could do it very quickly. And I think I really think it was important, very important part of the process. So Philip chose some piano pieces. There's a sonatina, I think there's a toccata, an ostinato piece, all that worked, that all wonderfully orchestrated, but gave a different flavor, I think, or as I say, enriched the flavor of the whole score. And I think it was just marvelous, and I love conducting it. I think it's wonderful. The original Guyana music. I mean, one other thing was it was interesting also. The Guyana score was originally, I think, 42, but it went through some changes. He revised it once or twice, and curiously, I remember realizing this at some point. There's a wonderful adagio, sort of probably apart from the saber dance, the most famous piece of music from Guyana. There's this other piece that some people know called the adagio from Guyana, but it actually doesn't appear in the full score for some reason, but it's in a suite. Who knows why that happened, but it's in a suite. I knew it from Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's where I remember hearing for the first time. And it's an absolutely remarkable piece of music. And so I suggested that, and Alexei was absolutely, I think, delighted to use it. And it comes right at the end of the ballet, and absolutely, it's the sort of the coming back together of the couple of Kalaroy and Careas, the final forgiveness, I guess, a moment in the whole ballet, and I think it comes at a wonderful moment. So all these elements, I think, are part of the process of doing a full-length ballet like this.
I wanted to ask you about what inspires you as a choreographer about the visual culture of ancient Greece. I know you mentioned going and studying the sculptures, in museums all over the world. But how specifically did you think about translating some of the visual aesthetics into actual movement?
Interestingly, our art, the art of ballet, is so rooted in ancient Greek aesthetics, and of course the movement, the resurrection of the classicism that started in the Renaissance, actually led to the development of ballet as an independent art form. And when you look at the sculptures in the museums, you see our basic principles. You see en dehors, you see en dedans, you see épaulement and croisé and effacé. You see all the arms position, the hands shaped, the attitudes, like this famous Mercury attitude immortalized by Giambologna. It's all, you can see it in the manuals, ballet manuals of 18th, 19th century. It's all there. Well, how to translate it all? I mean, it's all in classical vocabulary. So I didn't need to stylize it much, even though I've tried at the beginning to imitate the reliefs, all the men athletes led by Carriers, led by Tom. When they come on stage, it's like an imitation of the relief, and they fall down forward. I can actually name the sculpture that inspired me. It's in Olympia in Greece, in the museum. I think classical, the Greeks was their passion for beauty and also the logic and mathematics. I think they discovered the rules of the harmonious line. For the first time in history, they saw that a certain shape is more beautiful than the other shape. A certain line has harmony in it, and the other line doesn't have it. And they calculated, this golden ratio rule. The size of the head, the elongated neck, the smaller head, the long arms and legs, the size of the torso, and so on. And they based all their sculptures on this knowledge. And this is the basic rules of ballet, of classical ballet, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So it was extraordinary for me to discover that connection. Somehow I was not aware of it. Yeah, it's very, very connected.
Mm-hmm. Christine and Tom, I'm interested to hear you describe the movement style for your character. Or maybe you can share for us some of the things that Alexei said to you in the studio about how to move as your character and bring your character's personality to life.
Yeah, sure. Again, as Alexei was saying, there were no stylized like Grecian movements, maybe a couple of poses here and there. It was pretty much just the dancing quality and the technicality and the vast movement, basically how much you bend or the fluidity, sort of those kinds of things. We did work on some challenging lifts, which were fun, some that weren't used, but we explored different technically challenging things. And I love being challenged, and I feel that working with Alexei Ratmansky always challenges me to sort of break that next barrier that I have. And it's been really fun. And the choreography is very appropriate for the characters. And I had a great time learning it and performing it.
Similarly to Christine, I feel very fortunate to have performed the role, especially with Christine. She was a phenomenal partner, and she always remained so calm, and I'm the opposite, to be honest. So it's a good yin yang. As far as character development through Ratmansky, basically my character, he's a warrior, so he's athletic and heavy and strong. So all of these aspects, it wasn't easy for me to achieve straight away, but I feel some point during the second performance I started to tap into it a little bit, and hopefully we'll be doing this ballet many more times and I'll be able to tap into it even more. But I remember I watched, I was filled with all this imagery of like athletic heaviness, so I went home and watched Spartacus and like Gladiator, and I came in the next day and I had like real seriousness in my face, and Alexei was like, "Tom, you look like you're going to a funeral." And I was like, "Oh, wrong idea. You can still be heavy and athletic and sporty, but still have a smile on your face." So,
that's where it came from. This face expression.
Yeah, but it was, looking back, it was lovely experience. Feel so incredibly lucky to be a part of it all, and yeah, I think it's an incredible ballet that's going to do incredibly well when people get to see it.
I would love to add that even though I started with Christine and Tom in the studio in the fall, we prepared a partiture that actually was not used later on, but we spent a lot of time, and the closer we got to the premiere, the less time I was able to spend time with them, and I felt really bad about it because I had to prepare just one couple. And I trusted everyone else to just work it out on their own. And because we know each other so well, and we work so many times together with Tom and Christine, I adore them as dancers. And they actually, I don't know what you were talking about the opposition, Christine being calm. You seem to be a very, very calm person. And always positive, even though there was a couple of moments closer to the premiere that I felt you were just scared that it's not ready for the stage, as we all were. But Christine and Tom, they did an incredible job in, not working one-on-one with a choreographer, but they prepared everything sort of in the corner back in the studio, and they were very different from the other cast, from Catherine and Aaron, and absolutely on top of the material. That was beautiful to observe. It was really beautiful. They brought a lot of different colors to the roles.
And you two performed I think the pas de deux that was cut at the Temple of Dendur at the Metropolitan Museum in December. And this is an Egyptian temple that was built in I think the 1st century BC. What was it like performing at the Metropolitan Museum?
It was actually pretty spectacular. I thought that that was like the perfect set for that choreography, and it just fits so well with the costumes and the music. It was sort of magical that we were in this Egyptian temple surrounded by water. It was pretty remarkable. I think we had a great time dancing there.
Yeah.
Made some very beautiful pictures.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today. Please consider donating to the ABT Crisis Relief Fund. We really need your help and support.
We're done. Thank you all so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Good to see you guys.
Everyone.
Good to see you all.
Okay.
Great to see everyone.
Take
Bye,
care.
Tommy.
Bye.
Bye.